bottom for the tiny URL. That'll get you to the presentation. Dan said to Rick and I, hey, introduce yourself. So I've been introduced. That's a picture of me, and Greg took that picture. And I'm really happy that Greg took that picture of me all those many years ago out at Danville. And that's about me, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And the most important thing in all of that list of stuff about me is down at the bottom, those last three things. Ultimately, we got some proposed programs going on. It looks like the Astronomical League is going to have a master imager kind of program, just like there's a master observer, a binocular master observer. They're going to, you know, maybe do a master imager thing. And I kind of got Aaron Clevenson moving in that direction. And then Dan and I and another guy from Texas cooperated sort of, and we have written and proposed a kind of, I'm going to call it unified imaging program for approval for the Astronomical League for this year. It's called Foundations Imaging. And ultimately, Aaron had asked me to take the lead, but you can only be like a coordinator for 3 programs. So I'm really, really hoping that that the program gets approved and Dan's going to be the coordinator. So boom, there we go. So that's about me. We do outreach, you know, and I guess the silly question is, you know, what is it? And essentially, it's us talking to the public, trying to sell them on the idea that astronomy is a really cool thing, that we like to do it, that it's fun. And when you talk about outreach, we do it 2 different ways in 2 different places. Obviously, we do it at Bromwell Park, but we also go to their location. And so that's an important kind of concept when we talk about outreach. That is obviously Jim Toolman in the foreground, and in the background with the red hat is Eddie Aga. And that was like one of the school presentations that goes on. Now, if you're a hardworking individual, you probably don't do those kind of things, and it's mostly us retired kind of guys that do that. ASEM's main kind of outreach is the Friday night open house, and depending upon the season, whether it's winter or summer, you know, we'll show up with our equipment. We'll run the C-14, we'll run the JB. Hopefully, the 32 inch is going to be up, and we'll be able to run that and do that. And as that works on, the members in the club pick their particular object. So now it's galaxy season. So I'd say, oh, I'll probably have M81 and M82 up there, because for me, they're fun to look at in the same kind of eyepiece. But you go through and you do your thing and you make your comments. And in the wintertime, there only be maybe like 5 people show up. And in the summertime, I think we've had as many as 250 people at a Friday night house. They look through the scopes. Sometimes there's no lines. Sometimes there are really long lines. And a lot of times, particularly on the crowded nights, the public is going to hear the same presentation about the same thing. In other words, M13 is one of my favorite things. So if I'm there, I'm going to show people M13, and a lot of other people are too. And ultimately, when you're at Bromwell, it's hands-on, and that they touch the telescopes, you know, and I'm bad. I'm a retired school teacher. School teachers hug people. So I hug people, and people are together bumping in line, and it's all really, really social and all that sort of stuff. And the problem we got with that is, you know, COVID threw all that up. You know, we can't do the large gatherings. You know, you got to social distance. You got to wear your protective kinds of stuff. You know, direct people and equipment. There was a thread, and I think it was on the Bromwell users group. They were talking about, well, should you disinfect your eyepieces between uses? You know, here comes Johnny. He looks so, okay, here's Sarah. Wait a minute, I got to wipe it down. So, you know, they talk about those things. We're not going to be able to go to schools. You know, it's all closed. And, you know, and if you read the news, it could be a long time before we're back to normal, if we're ever back to normal again. The Astronomical League back in March came up with some suggestions, and I'll let you read the whole thing. I'm just going to say, consider expanding your use of electronic means, and down here, sharing telescope images to a monitor. And ultimately, that's a really kind of important kind of concept if we want to get back into the swing of things. I think St. Charles County is probably going to mandate that we're going to have to do something like that at Friday night open houses. But when you talk about those underlying things, the things that are underlying, that's something that's called EAA. And you may or you may not know about EAA. It's kind of been gradually building over the last 10 years, and I would say probably definitely in the last 5. I've got philosophy, if that's the word to describe it. We image for 3 reasons. Dan takes pretty pictures. That's what our club is, that's what our digital SIG group is kind of all about. The idea of people want to come and they want to be able to take those really gaspy, not gaspy, wrong word. You know, that kind of, oh, that's wonderful kind of stuff. We sometimes image for scientific data. Jim Rowe is a perfect example. He's listening here, and he can chime in if I got a wrong number, but he's discovered over 110 asteroids. I think that's pretty scientific. I know he's got over 76,000 observations at the AAVSO. So, you know, some people image for that. And then the third reason down there is to see more than you see with their eyes when you're looking through an eyepiece. And that third reason, that's EAA. And that's what EAA is all about. Ultimately, you're comparing in EAA what you're seeing on a monitor or on a screen to what you can see with your eyes. EAA may come close to pretty pictures, but if you're really interested in pretty pictures, go and actually work on that. Do the long exposures, you know, do the PixInsight and all that kind of stuff. I've been talking about EAA. What is it? It's electronically assisted astronomy. You use an analog or digital camera, and it captures the, you know, what you would normally see through an eyepiece, and somehow it's got to be displayed. It's not pretty pictures. It's to be able to see more than you can see. And then I will tell you, I got into it about 10 years ago. I bought an analog camera that was called the Samsung SDC 435, and it was a security camera, and it was fun to play with. And I would truthfully tell you that I did see the Horsehead from Bromelsick Park with it, you know. And when I say see, yes, see on a TV screen, but still I was able to see it. One of my favorite nights was when Tom Richards was there, and Tom had his, and I think it's a 10-inch that he's got, a Dob, and we're set up right next to each other, and he would show people, you know, M8, you know, through his Dob, and then they would come over and they would look at my computer screen, and a number of people had said, oh wow, there's color, you can see color, because it's really snowed about that. In EAA, it does have those possibilities. What do you need to do it? Well, you need to have a camera. And I got to tell you, I have in that first line there 2 different asterisks, because they're 2 different kind of cameras. You can get an analog camera, and they're usually based on a low light security camera, or you can get a digital camera. And generally those are either webcams or the kind of imaging cameras that we're using now, like from ZWO or something like that. If you have a digital camera, you want to stack a whole lot of short exposures, generally with the high gain, kind of like Landon did, you know, when he, and I think I remember Landon's from Maplewood. I definitely know he's inside of Lindbergh. And it's the kind of stuff that Landon originally started doing when he first got into imaging, capturing those kind of images. I have the asterisk by the analog because down here, down towards the bottom, you got to be able to display it and see it. And if it's an analog thing, you're generally going to display that directly to a TV monitor. If you got a digital kind of camera, you're generally going to take that to a computer. So that's what those kind of asterisks are for. Obviously, you're going to have some kind of optics, and so you're going to have either an OTA, some kind of optical tube, or some kind of lens. And it's kind of funny because a lot of times people just go out and buy a camera and they stick it on whatever they have. And a lot of times it doesn't match up. You really do need to be a little careful about the camera sensor size. And I'm going to just say the focal length of your telescope. Personally, I like to have a 1 degree field of view, because with a 1 degree field of view, that captures most of the size of the objects that we're going to want to see, other than maybe M31. And if you've got a digital camera, you can zoom in. And Stacy's really good at the zooming in part. He's got a camera that's got about I think a 3.5 field of view. And then he'll just take a slider and slide it down. And all of a sudden now he's probably looking at a 15 arc minute thing. So that you can zoom in. It's pretty cool to do. You need some kind of tracking mount. Sometimes people try to do it on a manual Dob, and they have dismal failures, and you would expect that. The mount can be either Alt-Az or EQ. And you say, well, why Alt-Az? Well, because the exposures are always going to be short. Field rotation isn't going to be a problem with a 15-second exposure. And I mentioned the display device, a TV monitor or a computer, and then some kind of software. And the software is generally going to be used, particularly if it goes through a computer. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to talk about SharpCap here in a couple minutes, but there are other programs to do the job. If you have an analog camera, it is possible to take the signal out of an analog camera and to run it through something that looks like, I don't know how it's going to show up on, oh, I got to, not in front of my picture, I got to hold it in front of the camera. This is what I call a frame grabber. Sometimes people call it a video capture device. This one happens to be an Easy Cap, okay, and they're about 20 bucks. And this is the thing that you would use if you wanted to take old VCR days. Let's say you got lots of old VCR movies and you wanted to get them into a digital format onto a hard drive. This is the kind of thing that you would get. You would hook up your VCR to this, and you would play it, and then you would go in through some kind of video capture thing. This will work with an analog computer, an analog camera to get you into a computer. And with that, I'll go to the next slide. Dimension of the sensor is really important. Sometimes sensors are tiny. A lot of security cameras have 1/3 of an inch sensors. Some sensors are huge. And the truth is that usually the bigger the sensor, the more expensive the camera is going to be. How can you tell what it's going to cover? Well, a good general rule is that for a given optical tube, if you put an eyepiece that has a particular focal length in, if that eyepiece is about the same as the diagonal of the sensor, you're going to get about the same view. And that sentence, the way I put it, may not make a lot of sense. So how about if I say, if you get a security camera with a 1/3 of an inch sensor, you're going to see about the same thing you would see with the 6mm eyepiece. A lot of times people try to stick that onto some kind of SCT, like a C8 or something like that. And then you're going to get a really, really tiny field of view. Tiny field of view means you got to have perfect go-tos. You won't be able to see larger objects. And I've got an example here. And the example is I took the cheapest ZWO camera, and that's an ASI 120MC, and it's got a 1/3 of an inch sensor. 1/3 of an inch sensors, like I said, are real common. If you stick that guy onto a C8, the C8's got a focal length of 2,000 millimeters, you end up with a field of view of about 8x6 arc minutes. And that might start doing a good job on planets, and it might do a good job on some double stars. But when it comes to most things, it's like, oh, you can't find anything, you can't see them. They do sell things that are called focal reducers, but focal reducers take additional in focus. And so it's not unusual that you buy the focal reducer, you stick it on, and all of a sudden you start racking in your focuser, and you get the big loud clunk sound, and everything's out of focus. And so what do? Well, long ago, I bought a bullet camera. Okay, actually, wait a minute. Let's just pull off. Yeah, a bullet camera. This is an analog camera, and I made this little bitty adapter that's an 1.25 on the outside. I put those in, and with this, I could slide it way down into my focusing tube, and I could take care of that in focus. You can use camera lenses if you got a lot of old lenses. I know John Duchek is a believer of using old camera lenses, and so you could use those too. At the bottom of the page, there's a big long URL. There are lots of places on the internet to go. I was really happy to go there because they did a nice job of saying, oh, well, if you got a 1/3 inch sensor, what's the sensor diagonal? And if you got a 1/1/1.8 sensor, it links all those things up. You can get an idea of those things. Here's some things about analog cameras. And the picture that you see is what you would get if you would buy today's most common analog camera. And I'm going to say that's probably a Revolution 2 imager. Okay. And if you and Stacy's nodding his head, I only can see Stacy. Grant's got his circle, and I see Mike down there. But though that doesn't look like Mike. That looks like, oh well, that looks like Jack. Anyway, but it's like these are the common. They're about $300 for that package. They're based around the low light security camera. A lot of times it was something that was called an LN300. You got to supply it with 12 volts. You get an RCA out, and it usually runs into a BNC connector. And you can see the BNC connector. Can you see my mouse? Stacy said yes. You can see the mouse, and BNC connector there. BNC connectors are hard to find now. When Radio Shack was around $5, you can buy, as many as you wanted. If you want to go cheap, you may be able to find something that's called a Starlight board camera. It used to be, 2-3 years ago, if you went to eBay and searched for eBay, you'd see literally hundreds of these guys. And the hundreds of the guys would be, $25.
Yeah, Amazon's got BNC connectors and all sorts of BNC adapters. So
I wouldn't be too surprised Gateway has those too.
Came back and I had to grab something else somewhere else. And so this is another example of an analog camera. This was a $4 Radio Shack project box and a $25 board camera. And ultimately I just sealed it all up. And right now I use it as an all sky camera. It's an analog camera, but it's the kind of thing we do. And truthfully, with this kind of thing, you really can see from Bromwell Park, you can see the horse head, okay? It uses what's called an on-screen display, OSD, okay? And you have to be able to control it somehow. And so a lot of times they have some kind of fiddling little plug. Now, if you look on the Revolution Imager, instead, there's some buttons right back there that are the typical cursor buttons, or you can use that guy right there. all work. I mentioned you need a frame grabber, and I already did this on the frame grabber. And the truth is that if you do analog, the camera does all the work. There's nothing else there. So you can't really do any post-processing unless you do use the frame grabber and go to digital. And truthfully, when you use a frame grabber or when you use an analog camera, it's really designed for the output device you're going to use. And usually that's a TV. And most TVs don't do better than 720 by 480. So that's a limiting kind of factor. The other kind of camera is a digital camera, and I just picked a random ZWO and put the picture up there. Generally, it does signal and power by USB 2 or USB 3. USB 3 is to be a good thing to have. You're going to need a computer to deal with it. Some people don't want to deal with the computer. Some people would rather deal with a little bitty monitor at the part or something like that. Computer control via software. You can buy cooling cameras. You get higher resolution, so you can zoom in more and more and more to get to tight places. So, there's a lot of good things to be said about digital. The one bad thing to be said about digital is digital can really, really run up the bucks, okay? So you can easily spend $1,000, $1,500 on a digital camera, where on the other end with an analog, it's like, 150, we're done, Side by side, analog, usually RCA, Revolution Imager 2 is a perfect example. Digital, it has a USB signal. You only need a monitor. For the digital, you need a computer. Analogs usually have a limited exposure time. If I read something correctly, the Revolution Imager, one of them only has a maximum 5-second exposure. So you can't do too much with that. There is a feature on some of the analog cameras. It's called digital noise reduction. You can turn that on and it will then up to 5 times scan and stack internally. Even then, it kind of is limited. So your exposure time is limited. I think on some ZWO cameras, I know they'll do at least 1,000 seconds. I think I saw one that does 9,999 second exposure or something like that. It's like over the top. For an analog, you're going to need a frame grabber. And with the digital, you just do it by software. When you use a frame grabber, whatever happens, no matter what the resolution of the camera starts with, it goes through the frame grabber. The frame grabber's at the resolution that you deal with. That's what goes into the computer. You get the resolution of the camera, got that one out of the way. Unless you use a frame grabber with analog, there's no stacking, there's no histogram tweaking, there's no dark or flat correction. And I got to tell you, I'm a digital person, okay? One thing I would tell you about, particularly if you want to go analog and you want to use a frame grabber, is that you set the exposure on the camera, okay? But if you're using software to capture after the frame grabber, you have to set the frame grabber capture rate as the same as the camera rate, or otherwise you might be capturing the same picture at 30 frames per second while the camera is grabbing the next picture. Does that make sense? Okay, I tried to explain it. Oh, well. Hey, one place where digital is good, not digital is good, analog is really, really good, is if you're going to do something with the time inserter, and we've talked about that at some other meetings. It's the kind of thing John Duchek might do with the lunar impacts, and if you're into occultations. Here are some pictures, okay? And I show you these pictures because I know Stacy talked a little bit about the Revolution Imager at the last ASEM meeting. These are natural pictures. If you go to their website, this is the picture that you see, okay? And they look all nice and all sharp and they look all pretty. But if you look at the actual images themselves blown up to native, it's really 720 by 480, and I got a screen here that's 1900 pixels wide. So a lot of times these guys end up looking choppy, really modeled background. On some of mine, they almost look like they had like square pixels or something like that. I think I got that covered. If you want to go digital, you can buy the cheapest ZWO camera, and it's the ASI 120MC. And again, these are the pictures down here in the corner that they list on the website, but when you blow the pictures up, oh, look, there's detail. Oh, they look prettier and they're happier, okay? And so one of the truths I would tell you, and you see the words over here, it says, Google those images to verify. I'm not trying to sell or anything like that, but check these guys just to make sure that I'm not fooling you on that. Stacy picture time. Well, no, I don't think this is Stacy picture. This is Stacy picture time. It is Stacy picture time. Stacy took this with his ASI 294MC. It's got a 4/3 chip. He says, yes, I did that right. And it was 15 seconds exposures. His field of view from here to here using his 4-inch scope is about 1.5 degrees. Okay. And this obviously is M81 and that's M82. And this is a zoomed in version of what M81 is going to look like. And there's a lot of nice detail in there. You can see, at least on my monitor, you know, I can see dark lanes and it's just really nice picture. It looks really, really good. Okay. And this is the kind of thing you can do with EAA. And a lot of people who are now into things realize that maybe they can get, maybe going in EAA for almost what they're paying for the price of a really good eyepiece. I've mentioned darks and flats. This is an example. I just had to include it because it was so bad. The junk on the sensor says, oh my, look at me. Your eye is drawn to that more than anything else. This thing up in the corner. Flats would take care of that. And then the model background darks would take care of it. My favorite piece of software to view this is something that's called SharpCap. Down at the bottom, there are 2 versions, free and pro. The pro version is 10 pounds a year or 15 bucks a year. I think it's worth it. I've been using it for probably 5 or 6 years. And truthfully, ages ago, I wrote the guy who's the author, his name's Robin Glover, and I said, Robin, you need to capture, you need to add something new here. You need to add flats and flat correction, because I had a camera that did crap just like this all over the screen. And I said, because I got to get rid of that stuff. And Robin said, oh, no, we don't need that stuff. Well, it's in there now. So I feel proud about that. An advantage of SharpCap is that it can control all sorts of different cameras, particularly if it's got an ASCOM driver. Okay. It can do live stacking with rotation. Why is rotation important? Well, if you've got an alt-as mount, you're going to get field rotation. So there's going to be rotation between each and every image. If they just stack directly, you'd eventually get the streaks. But if you're stacking and it does and corrects for the rotation, everything's going to look good. Now, I'm going to smile at Dan and say, Dan has an S-Big camera. And Dan's S-Big camera doesn't have an ASCOM driver. So what is Dan to do? In the Pro version, SharpCap can monitor a folder, and it can stack the contents of the folder. And that'll work for, I think, virtually anything. So if you have the ability to take, and I'm going to pick a Sony DSLR. If you got a Sony DSLR and there's any way that you can capture to the hard drive of your computer an image taken with that when they're connected, SharpCap can deal with it, and SharpCap will stack it. Okay. One of the neat things about it, and I'll show you how to do it in just a second, is you can manipulate the black, the mid, and the white points of the histogram to really bring out detail. Some more features. It can control an ASCOM mount, focuser, and filter wheel. Now, why do I have the focuser and filter wheel underlined? Because I don't have them, so I'm not 100% sure. But the documentation says yes, so I'm going to say it's going to work. Okay. There is a program that is called Astronomy Stacking. I forgot what it stands for. Sorry, senior moment. Astronomy Stacking and something program. Oh well. But anyway, it's now right now the hot plate solver program. It can call that, or it can call any astrometry.net plate solvers to center up your image and find it where you pointed in the sky. It can do dark and flat frame corrections. It can write in a variety of formats. You can save individual files. So if you say, okay, I'm going to take all these, but I'm going to stack them too. When you're done in the evening, you can then take them off, put them on your regular computer. You can stack them and calibrate them and all that sort of stuff in PixInsight or some other kind of program you do. Or if you want, you just say, hey, this is cool enough and I don't want to have to do any work at home. A truth, and I won't ask for a show of hands because right now I only see 4 people. But you think about it. Do you like doing the PixInsight stuff? I think Rick does. I know Rick spends hours upon hours in doing that thing. But I suspect there are people out there who think it's kind of intimidating and they'd rather take the pictures and see the results and not have to do that little part in the middle. You know, Dan says he can do it in 10 minutes. Well, okay. So anyway, so you can, if you get it on the way you like it on the screen, you can save it directly out of it. You could do scripting for Iron Python, okay, for for advanced stacking. And the question be why you want to do that. Well, let's pretend Mike K wants to do some solar imaging and he wants to try to do some video, time-lapse video of prominences. think about what you could do to do prominences. Well, you could record the sun, for 2 hours and fill up your hard drive. Or with this kind of scripting, what you could literally do is say, I want to take 20 images, stack them, wait a minute. I want to take 20 images, stack them, wait a minute. I want to take 20 images, stack them, wait a minute. And you could save each of those images and you could make a video out of that. It seems to me to be one of the really good, neat kind of things for
Hey,
that
Steve.
kind of thing.
Hey, Steve,
Yes.
you say these programs do stacking. Do you have a ability to specify the quality of the images that it selects, or does it just take a whole bunch and just stack?
No, it just takes anything you give it.
Okay.
Well, actually, SharpCap, that. I'll back up and say SharpCap's original intent was it controls your camera, okay? And so it's taking the imaging and it's going to stack every image that comes in.
Okay.
Now, it's Sigma Kappa, so if an airplane flies through, it can hopefully reject that. Okay.
Well, I wasn't sure if it was stacking for quality or stacking just to build up an image so that you can see what you got.
Quality has nothing here. I mean, it's part of the puzzle. Okay. Now, if you do the folder monitoring, you could look at your pictures first and say, well, that's bad, I'm throwing that away. You just don't dump it in your folder.
Sure. But this at least lets you get your framing on some really dim objects to make sure that you're actually where you want to be.
Yeah.
Is that the reason why they're using the stacking, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, one other thing that's good, and I'm going to say, remember, I'm talking about outreach here, though I haven't said anything about outreach for a couple minutes, is it does support 2 monitors, okay? And when you do that, you can display the final developing picture, for lack of a better term, on one of the monitors, okay? And then the other monitor can have your control stuff. And so it shows you where you're doing all your fiddling and all that sort of stuff, but the people who are watching only get to see the good stuff. So I think that's kind of cool that it supports that. And down at the bottom,
Well, you could also show them, oh, here's a picture I spent hours and hours making. Here's a quick and dirty of it. You could sell if you had that on file.
yes. And then down at the bottom, you'll see that an unofficial guide to SharpCap. That's a hot link if you would download this, and you can see that it's an ugly looking thing. But there was a guy who is on Cloudy Nights who about a year and a half ago wrote this, and it's a really good starter document to figure out what's going on. That's what the screen is, and I want to apologize because when I was putting this together, I did it in the daytime, and I'm in the back room of the house, and I'm always in, and I pointed the camera out the window through the screens. The windows are dirty, and those are the trees waving in the background of my neighbor's house. Okay, so I'm going to apologize first.
Hey, Steve,
Yes.
I do have a SharpCap pulled up in case you wanted to see it, but if you're going to show it this way, that's fine, just in case you need it.
I think this is, for what I want to do, I think this is going to be okay.
Okay, cool.
You do control stuff over here. By control stuff, what I mean is set your exposure. How long do you want them to be? Set the gain. What do you want it to be? Over here on this side of the screen, there's a place where you can say, oh, I've already established and taken my darks. I've taken my flats and made masters for both. These are the flats this is the dark and the flat masters that I want to apply. Obviously, there's a histogram here. I don't know if you can see that line right there. There are 2 others on the screen. One of them's way over here. One of them's over here. And with this, you can control the gray point. With this line over here, the dark point. Any image that we're looking at over here. There's an auto exposure. There's a clear it, and there's a save an image kind of thing. Obviously, down here, if you've got an ASCOM mount, this is how you can make the mount go up, down, right, left. Does a little spiral search. This guy right here, okay, is do a plate solving. You got plate solving set up. I got to tell you a funny story. I once emailed Robin, the guy who wrote the program, said, I sure wish I knew where I was. I can't see anything about where, where my alt is. He said, well, just take that middle thing and slide it on over it, make it bigger. And it made the text really, really big. And it's all daylights. Up here is a live stack button. When you click the live stack, it starts stacking and puts stuff here. There are a number of tabs across here. Status tells you how you're doing. I like to have histogram up and showing, and this just shows you the histogram of that image. And if you play with this guy, it will change your white point. If you change this guy, it will change your gray areas, okay? And down here is the foot or the toe, and it'll do the black. And over here, it's some stuff about stacking. And this picture that you're currently looking at right now was 4 stacked images of the trees blowing next door. It's kind of fun to play with. I don't know how else to describe it. Color balance is good. Obviously, they're auto, and down here, this is color balance on the histogram. This is color balance based on the stars. You can move these up and down, and Stacy's is always blue. And I'm colorblind, so I decided I'm always going to play with this guy, which is hue. And if you're colorblind and you turn hue way, way down, it all looks nice. And so I'm happy with that. I think my next picture is a stolen picture. Yes, it's a stolen picture. This is a stolen picture from Dan, okay? And Dan wanted to find out if the drop in his pictures from New Mexico into a watch folder would stack and work. And so he sent me, I don't know, what, 20 pictures maybe? That's a guess. And there were no darks and no flats. And if with darks and flats, we'd have gotten rid of this stuff on the side. But here's an example of M106.
Yeah.
Okay, M106. And you can see there's detail. And this was in Sharp Cap, okay? And the way that this all worked was, back picture, it stacked, they were here, and I played with that line and that line and that line. And you just kind of keep slide them over and slide them over and slide them over until you get good. I will tell you, if you do this, there are ways to be more careful with the lines and how you're sliding. Hold down the shift key or use your finger on a touch screen. I discovered that this weekend. Sometimes people don't want to use Sharp Cap because it's got a learning curve, okay? And I'd be the first person to admit it. I would imagine that if we cleared all this out and said, okay, raise your hands, who's got a camera? And you raise your hand. Okay, whose camera is a ZWO? Lots of people's hands are still up. If you're a ZWO user, they do have a program that's called ASI Studio. It stacks. It does the stuff you kind of want it to do. It's a lot easier to learn, but it's not as full featured, okay? When you load ASI Studio, it's got 3 parts. I honestly don't know the difference between these two, okay? But one, ASI Cap's been around for a while. You would use that to adjust your focus. You'd get an idea of what kind of exposures you want to use, okay? I'm assuming this guy does the very same thing, okay? And then once you get all that established, you know what you want to do. Then you go to the live stacking part called ASI Live, and you get a screen of more trees blowing in my backyard. But this is a whole lot simpler, okay? This zooms in, that zooms out. That makes it full screen size. That shrinks it back. This turns on a bullseye. You know, I'm not sure what this does. That saves it. And over here, all you have to do is say, connect to my camera. What resolution do you want? What do I want the gain to be? How long do I want the exposures to be? And then you say, go do it. And it'll just start snapping pictures and snapping pictures and snapping pictures and snapping pictures until you're, you know, say, okay, stop. And ultimately, you see the histogram for your picture. And this can only control the white point and the dark point. So you don't get the gray, but still, what looks easier to use? This guy. So, you know, it might be something you want to think about starting. Other platforms, Android, I'll give you maybe, because I told you a couple months ago about me trying to do it on my tablet. Tablet's too far away to reach, and it worked really, really well. My only problem was that I couldn't charge and use the camera at the same time, and the camera toasted my battery after an hour or so on that. And then if you're into Linux, ASI Air does it. Stacy will testify that. We played 2 nights ago, Sunday night. Okay, I'm assuming StellarMate is going to do it, and Astroberry might be a possibility. Okay, so that's all about the cameras, and that's all about the equipment. Let's pretend now you've got something. The next thing you want to talk about is, well, why would you want to use EAA for outreach? And ultimately, I will tell you that probably back in 2012 or 13, I was an avid person working on astronomically observing programs. One of the observing programs is the outreach program. And for the highest level, you were supposed to write an article that they could publish in the Reflector. And I decided, oh, I want to write mine on EAA. So I sat down in the dark room with a cup of coffee, and I thought for a while. And I came up with most of the things that you see on this screen. And I still think they're for all intent purposes, they're true. Okay. One of the cool things about EAA and outreach is that everybody can see the stuff at the same time. It's not that it is waiting who wants to go first, or, you know, I can't see it and mom says, did you see it? And I don't know. And it's just like, everybody can see everything because it's on a TV screen, because people know how to see stuff on TV screens when there are, 1 year old. Go look at the TV screen. Go get entertained. It's entertainment here. One of the truths is there's less dead time, particularly when we have those giant crowds in the summer. You as the operator of the telescope may say, we've been on this object for 15, 20 minutes. It's time to get something new, but you're still seeing new faces. So, you know, it's like, here's a case where you can do more objects if you want to, particularly similar type objects. So if you got a globular cluster pulled up, show 2 or 3 in a row for people who are interested. They get an idea what different globulars look like. Or as Jack said, just show them the one globular cluster that you're currently working on and pull up previous images of 5 or 6 and say, these are all globular clusters. Why are they globular clusters? Why do they look alike? You see differences between them. Some other kind of things about outreach in AA, you can do fainter detail that you can see, okay? The human eye, you know, according to an article I read at B&H Photo, the human eye has a shutter speed of between 1/100th and a 200th of a second. When we're taking our images, we might, you know, have a 30-second exposure. It gathers more photons. You're just going to be able to display them. You can see stuff under bright moon conditions. You know, there are times when we go out to Rummelsek Park and it's a full moon and you feel like taking a book out, you know, without any light, just holding it up or reading stories because you realize you're not going to see anything up there. With EAA, you can see it. You will be able to see color. You can cheat and see more color if you turn up the saturation. Physically challenged individuals might not be able to get to an eyepiece, but they can probably sit somewhere, you know, and see what's going on the computer screen. It can be done with less expensive optics and smaller mounts, okay? And then back to our COVID stuff, the operator is the only person who's going to actually touch this stuff. In using EEA for outreach, I see it done 2 different ways, okay? I see our traditional kind of setting, you know, whether you're doing it at a Friday night open house or you got friends, you know, over and you want to show the stuff in your backyard. People can see it on the computer screen instead of looking through the eyepiece. You're sitting around and it's like, you know, you're all having a beverage and you're all comfortable and it's like, oh, here's another one, you know, and they look over, oh yeah, that's cool. Ultimately, one of the things we've got to be a little careful about is that while the image is coming in, I think it's probably better to take lots of shorter images in terms of exposure time with higher gain than versus a long kind of thing. I think people would rather see the screen refresh, you know, somewhat periodically versus a minute exposure and they, oh, anything happening here? Nothing for the last 45 seconds, that kind of thing. And then lastly, a lot of times the operator's going to describe the kind of things going on. That's how I see us using EAA. Oh, I spelled that wrong, sorry about that. How using EAA for our traditional things, the things that we've done, how it fits into the current model. But there's a second way, and I think it's the live internet stuff, okay? And this is new, really. I mean, maybe some people have done it in the past, but this spring it's really, really blossomed. It's individuals that are doing it. It's clubs that are trying to get it going. It's you know, national observatories that are making it happen, and they're doing internet-based outreach, and they're showing people the sky on TVs. ASEM's made a commitment to do it. Stacy's the head point, or the head man on it. He's the person who's working the hardest, and we'd like to. And I'm going to say we've made some progress one way or the other. And I got to tell you, I don't think Stacy's seen my list yet. Okay, and I'm going to say it's all about bandwidth. I'd say bandwidth's more important than having a dark sky. Okay. And I got to tell you that you could be in the whole darkest spot in the world, but if you can't reach out to the rest of the world, it for this stuff does absolutely no good. And so the traditional places that we're doing things like Rummelsek and Danville and Whiteside, they may strike out because of that. Now, Jim Rowe, JR, says that he's got T-Mobile, and he says he can get a good connection at the park with T-Mobile. I will say I'm Verizon. And I was out there checking a couple of days ago, and I think my upload speed was 0.19 megabits per second. So I was like, I'm not going to be able to do it from there. Are you familiar with the 6 Ps? Anybody? I don't see the people there. Prior planning prevents poor performance. You got good ideas of what's going to go on. You just can't sit there and you can't bull your way through it. That's prior planning prevents poor performance. One of my favorite expressions. Something's going to go wrong, okay? You got to have some kind of backup. Zoom as we're doing tonight, Jitsi or whatever, they can use Coordinate, you know, and then they can feed YouTube Live. YouTube Live has the advantage of people are going to see, and ultimately they can kind of chat a little bit with text, but they don't really bog down your particular bandwidth for your particular system. I got to tell you, it's harder to do than a PowerPoint presentation. Here I'm doing this, I'm just blabbling and I'm hitting the mouse or the space bar. If you're doing this and you're doing it for outreach, you're controlling the camera, you're controlling the mount, you're controlling software, you're entertaining people. You got this big long list of things. Any one of the things is a weak spot, and if it fails, it's like you got a problem. To that end, I'm always going to suggest we always have a helper. Okay, if you're out there, have one person do the technical stuff and have a second person entertain the crowd. And you know, you talk back and forth where the entertainer says, "Hey, bring me up a map of the Milky Way. Let me show it. Let's show where this thing is in the Milky Way." And the technical person does that. And then the entertainer person says, "Hey, let's go over to M13." And so while the telescope's going over to M13, you're getting it all focused and you start integrating and all that sort of stuff. You know, the entertainer is doing their sing and dance. I think that's probably a good idea. And then Stacy doesn't necessarily know this, but he's been known to stomp around on the floor sometimes in his observatory, and it does sometimes make a bit of noise. Okay? You got to be a little careful with that. What's it look like? This slide is kind of like why I ask you if you would to look at the Stephen Hummel video. Stephen was a St. Louis Econ grad. He had always liked astronomy. He was an ASEM member, and he was lucky enough to get his job out of college at McDonald Observatory. And I think probably a lot of us know him, but if you don't, he's just a fine, fine person, okay? Really a nice guy. He's done 5 live broadcasts. He's going to do more from McDonald Observatory. I've been posting, and other people have been posting when you find out they are. I think they're worth watching. You got to understand, part of my job in the past, back on that information screen, I was a chemistry teacher. But there was a period of 8 years that I worked in the administration building in the Hazelwood School District. And part of my job when I was there was I was one of the about 9 people who was in charge of teacher training for the Hazelwood School District. And literally, we started, you know, this is how you got to be a good teacher. This is what you got to do. And we go to teachers in their classrooms and we talk to people and we talk about best practices and stuff they have to do. Stephen has all sorts of things that I'd like to call best practices. And I'd ask you to watch that little video because I think it demonstrates a lot of the things. And so that's the next slide. In no particular order, he had a preset time limit. He said he doesn't want to go more than an hour, okay? He planned out in advance what his targets were going to be. He said he was going to do 5 of them. And a lot of times he would try to revolve that around some kind of common theme. I remember one night that JR wanted us to go look at globular clusters and Ophiuchus. I thought that was a cool thing. He's looked at the information. He's done his book work. He's done his homework. He's done readings. He knows what he's going to say about the targets in advance. I wouldn't be surprised if he's got some notes around too. One of the things is he just doesn't have you look at this blank screen that gets slowly better and slowly better as he's capturing data and stacking it. He fills with some kind of interesting kind of content. If he's got to fiddle with anything, he does it off screen. The only thing you see on the screen are the things that he wants you to see. He's got additional resources to call on. He's personable. He answers questions. And I think he's got 4 other people helping him. I've seen the names go back and forth. He's got a 16-inch scope, so he gets data pretty quickly. I mentioned that magic word fill. He fills, okay? What could you talk about? Well, pretty much when we do outreach, we almost always use the Messier object. So most of the time, you know, we're on Messier objects. So I think one of the things we need to do is talk about Charles Messier. If you're into Caldwell's, talk about Patrick Moore. We could pull up a chart of the night sky. Stephen does that. He uses the sky. He's got this cute little laser pointer, little kind of icon-y thing that points up to where it's looking in the sky. It's cute. One of the things I had seen on cloudy nights was there was an old program I used. It used to be called M13. And Bill Chomsky has a new version of it that only runs on iOS. If you have heard of Bill, it might be because he was one of the 2 main authors on Sky Safari. And so that's his app there is really cute about showing stuff where it's in the sky. People are always going to want to know what equipment you're using, what software you're using. I think it'd be a good idea to take a daytime picture of your equipment. And so while this is integrating, slide that picture and say, well, here's my stuff, you know. And I think Jack was the one who said, you know, similar objects, display pretty pictures, go have them and load them on the screen and show other people, you know, well, these are ones that I took, or here's a picture I took of this, you know, but instead of taking these short exposures, maybe only for 5 minutes, here's where I spent 8 hours doing it, something like that. People always know how big it is, how far it is, how old. I had a real good friend who was into school newspapers. He was an award-winning person. He said, everything has to tell in the news story, you know, who, what, when, where, how, why. Those are the things people know. If you don't notice stuff, I could tell you to make it up, but that's not really a good idea. But if you've got Sky Safari, for most of the Messier objects and the important objects, there's even an audio clip. You can play the audio clip. And I mean, you know, you think, well, that's cheating. Yeah, but if you're playing the audio clip, it gives you time to go, you know, fiddle around with the computer to do stuff you want to do. And then ultimately you can run apps and stuff like that. So what should be possible? How can ASEM get into this, you know, and stick their foot in the door and get some kind of at least local renown? Well, imagers probably in our group, we probably already have our own equipment. You could probably use that. But for ASEM, I'm going to make the suggestion, and it's been approved, that they use the C-14 in the roll-off roof observatory at Bromelsick, okay? And the club has a Canon T1 camera that's been modded, and Dan's been trying to get people to use that for years, and it sits in the box and it never gets used. And I'm going to say use a 0.5x focal reducer. I happen to have that focal reducer, and then a large screen TV, and that ultimately gives you a field of view and not quite 40 by 25 arc minutes. And so that's a pretty good sized field of view, all things considered. And I think that we can put that in the park and do that as Friday night open house, and have people look at the screen and see the objects you want to see. I say it's in development because it's not all working yet. I've been struggling with it, trying to get it to go. We need to eventually get a TV and an HDMI cable. Dan suggests the casting or mirroring it outside. I like that word verification. I'm trying to make sure all the parts work. Don't ask me why I couldn't get things in focus yesterday. Might have something to do with forgetting to take a diagonal out of the optical frame. And then it means that we're probably going to have to deal with sky alignment a whole lot more than we used to. And we're going to have 2 people run it. I mean, that's the only way it can happen. Ultimately, it would be a good idea to show you that in terms of a picture. I think you can figure out the parts and how it goes. It should work. It should be a really good deal. I would say it could work to the point where possibly, if we could ever get things back to normal, it might be worth it, you know, one night a month, you know, one Friday night open a house a month. And I'm thinking what might actually work out to be a good one would be maybe like the full moon night, only because, you know, we can't see much on full moon anyway. And so here, give this guy a shot.
Hey, Steve,
Yes.
Malencamp has a monitor, a kit that you can buy that has the monitor and everything. You might go look at that.
Yeah, well, you know, I've got all the parts here and I understand how that works. The only problem with the Malencamp is the Malencamp is an analog camera, okay? And so you don't get the really, really good resolution on it. But yeah, I understand totally what you mean.
Now they have a kit with a monitor. They have a kit for doing this kind of outreach already put together with the monitor and everything.
Yeah, how big is the monitor?
I think it's like a 26-inch.
Okay. I know. And Stacy,
it's industrial grade.
Okay. I think Stacy has thought that maybe it was going to be what? It's a 42-inch or something huge.
Yeah, I just found a 50-inch, $225 monitor that we would hook up at the observatory and use that to hang on the wall. There's a wall mount, 2 sides, hang it on the inside. When we close it up and hang it on the outside, you permanently mount these things and it slides into it. Light enough for 2 people to carry 22 pounds. And then you just clip it on the outside of the wall when you're doing that, and then take it off and clip it on the inside of the wall of the observatory when you're done.
And I should smile and say, I promise I'm going to get everything working to right about here. Okay, and then I'll be glad to help as much as I can with that part. Okay. Some advantages using this equipment. The T1 is modded, so come summer and diffuse nebula, we got to be able to get some good hydrogen alpha stuff, and so I think that's pretty good. We're going to have a computer here, and it's going to hook up to the mount. Well, Celestron's got the new software, CPWI, and we're going to probably try to get the CPWI to work on here along with SharpCap. And CPWI's got some kind of interesting features about being able to build a pointing model for the telescope. And so we might even be able to get better go-tos. So there's some things that are, really a good possibility. Do some plate solving to get it even centered. So we're playing. And then ultimately, what else is possible? If you want to use club equipment, okay, the club does have in the safe, imaging safe, an ASI 174. It's a black and white, monochrome, I should use the right word, a monochrome monitor. And if you put that on a $100 Shark Tube 80, it gives you a pretty nice field of view. Okay, now the question might be, well, what mount do you put it on? I know ASEM has 2 other go-to mounts that aren't used much. I know one of them is, well, with the 2 solar telescopes. How about if I say that? But I don't know how good the go-tos are on those. The club's got it right now, a Starshoot auto guider. It's an Orion SSAG. You put that on the right mount, like, again, one of the solar telescope mounts, then and ultimately that could work. And I don't want to make JR unhappy, but we could steal the ETX 80 off the 32-inch, and that would be another possibility too. So, there are a lot of possibilities with ASEM equipment that's there. And truthfully, I see the 2 limiting factors really as being, there are really not enough good go-to mounts around, and there are not enough interested in experienced people. We could do something about the experienced people, but COVID says we can't get close enough to do anything about it. So it's like, as we go through the summer, as we get together, you probably need to have some possibilities of meetings in people's backyards or something like that, be able to stay away from crowds, whatever. I think that's my last picture. It is. So I'm going to go up here and say, stop share. And I'm going to say, if anybody wants to turn on a speaker and speak, feel free.
Any questions?
I had a question. I'm directed at Dan. You're the only other SkyX user I know of out there. There might be more. Have you played around with the live stack feature? You've introduced into that?
I haven't used any of the LTI or the live stacking stuff. I just recently installed SharpCap to see what it would do, because I thought it would be something I could do when the moon's out and I might have clear skies in New Mexico and we don't have clear skies here. So I'd hope to help out, but no, I haven't tried any of the new stuff yet.
Yeah.
The newer stuff.
Because that's what Richard, what's his name, the developer for the SkyX, but he developed it for Outreach. So that
Okay.
might be something to look into as well. Richard Wright.
Well, I'm the newcomer to the group here, so I use the SkyX primarily just for the scope and the mount control and my dome control. I only have used SharpCap for like planetary imaging. I've not used it for anything deep sky. And that I've been using, well, traditionally I've used the SkyX for deep sky, but SkyX has a lot of limitations, particularly in the area of automation. And then I started using Sequence Generator Pro, which I find myself getting increasingly frustrated with. So I'm starting now to look at Voyager. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Voyager, but it looks pretty promising. Yeah, what I've got is a 14-inch RC, and it's on a Paramount ME2. And that's all housed in my, I have a PodMax observatory dome. So I'm kind of curious about what you're doing here, because I have been looking at possibly doing, at some point, doing some sort of an outreach program with a local community college. I've already from the day one that I set my stuff up, I thought, I'm not going to try to do anything with an eyepiece, because that kind of interferes with my setup for digital imaging. So, and I thought, well, you know, if you do any kind of outreach, and I've had friends and neighbors over to take a look at what I've got, it shows a lot better. And I totally agree with your presentation, Steve. Shows a lot better on the big screen. And I've got like a 43-inch Samsung monitor in that dome, and it works great, because people, you know, you can have several people looking over your shoulder, looking at whatever it is, whether it be the moon, whether it be Jupiter, whether it be, you know, M13, it doesn't matter. You can see it right there. They can all see it at the same time. There's none of this, oh, I can't see it. I'm not looking in the eyepiece right. And that's one of the things that's always kind of been I've been to Kip Peak Observatory. I've been to the one up in Flagstaff, and every one of their outreach programs involves standing in the line and looking through an eyepiece. And you know, you can't see everything that, like you said, you can't see everything you can see through the camera. So I like this approach. I do, and I'm kind of thinking, is there a way that, you know, possibly I could get involved in what you're trying to do?
I want to see. I will say it again and encourage anybody here to go watch Stephen Hummel and what he does, okay? And then ultimately, a couple of things I will mention about Stephen. He does use 2 monitors. He does use SharpCap. And yesterday we found out he uses something that is called OSB Studio. Yeah, OSB Studio, to control everything, to sequence what he has. He's got various windows open, and he uses that to say, this is the window I want to show. This is the next thing I want to show. And that's what.
And I did use OSB Studio myself when I was setting this up for our stuff. And I found that it does work great as long as you have an assistant. Otherwise, it's too busy to get set up. And if you think SharpCap has a learning curve, OBS Studio has a pretty big learning curve as far as getting it set up to YouTube. I'm sure once you get it set up, it's easy, but I defaulted to Jitsi, which simply then displays right on YouTube whatever you're showing on the screen, and you can always hide the other stuff or go to 2 monitors with SharpCap, like you said. So,
Steve, this is Dave. I had a question about what are the possibilities of recording astronomical events with this kind of technology for an outreach on a pre-plan, a night when, you know, it wasn't a Friday night. You know, Friday nights only come around so often, and a lot of times the weather's bad or raining. And does this lend itself to recording interesting astronomical events like transits or whatever?
I will give you 2 thoughts on that. I think if ASEM does this and it is successful, and if people consider it successful, that it might be possible to somehow, I hate to use the word, harvest the list of email addresses so we can send out a notification saying, hey, next Tuesday night, there's going to be a lunar eclipse. Either come to Bromelsick or watch this on YouTube live, you know. And I think that, you know, getting the message out to people. Years ago, we used to have tons of people who came to Bromelsick, and ultimately the numbers died off because we had such a long string of bad weather. After the weather we've had since last fall, sticking the coronavirus with that, it's like, then when we can slowly start to open up in the summer, will anybody even want to remember us? You know, it's like, we've got to get the foot in the door somehow.
I totally agree. I think it's a lot of possibilities here, though.
I think
very much so.
YouTube, your comment about YouTube, I think it automatically records, but I'm not sure. Maybe you have to select it or something.
Well,
So even if you're doing YouTube live, you might be able to play it back later.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, and what we're doing here is I assume Dan is recording this?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, I saw the recording button up here in the corner, and I figured that somebody recording. So technically, yeah, we could go play this and we could tell people, oh yeah, this is live. It isn't, but once you put it on YouTube, I'm guessing they save it forever. Stacy's got a YouTube live channel. Yes. He nodded.
Yeah, I think at some point the club needs to make one, and that way we can point, now that the club has a Zoom account, we can point it at the channel, and we can just throw all of this stuff on there.
Well, I have that actually. I got Kirk to give me an email address called ASEM Friday Night Open House.
Okay.
And I was going to use that to establish it. Of course, he gives me the password and it doesn't work. And so I said, Kirk, why isn't the password working? I can't establish the account. And I haven't heard back from him about 5 days. So, but I do have my own YouTube channel. But yeah, you're right. That was the whole goal. As outreach coordinator for ASEM, I asked him to set up that email account. And then with that email account, I'll open up the YouTube account called ASEM Friday Night Open House. And then that's what we're planning on streaming it through. And whoever's running it that night will just get the password to open the account and stream, and we'll embed the YouTube link in there. So,
Okay.
so I'm on a second conference now if you hear some noise in the background. So another astronomy conference same time.
The weird ideas. And my weird idea of the day was, and you could do this to do the beginner meetings. If it could be known to beginners, hey, ASEM answers questions online. Tune into a Zoom meeting or tune into a YouTube live, ask your question, and an ASEM expert will find the answer. That would go too.
You mentioned teachers too. I bet you there's a lot of teachers desperate for material. They
yes.
have to kind of scramble. I don't know if it's
and
too late in the semester, but
the parents of homeschooled children who are always looking for things, sciencey related stuff. But at the same time, I will tell you the bad news there is that there is this thing that is called the state test. And the state test is really good on physical sciences, general, and maybe a little weather, and maybe a lot of physics, and maybe a lot of biology, and maybe a lot of chemistry. But it does not have much at all to do with astronomy. I like Mike's picture.
So Mike doesn't really know what he's doing. I apologize for the interruption, everyone. How do I unshare this? Crap. Sorry. How do I unshare?
You did.
Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
clicked the button on my end that turned it off.
Thank you, Dan. Sorry.
Yeah, you blew him off.
All right.
I was gonna say, if nobody has anything, I bet you it could be Rick's turn.
Sure, I can start. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, cool. Let's see if I can figure out how to share my screen, actually. All right, let me know if that comes across.
Yeah.
That should be a lot of stuff, but that's just because I have a bunch queued up. So Dan wanted us to give introductions. So my name's Rick Steiling. I have been an ASEM member at least for maybe 4 years, but if you've joined in the last couple years, you've probably never seen or heard from me, and that's because life changed a lot a couple years ago and made it more difficult to get out. So I'm an astrophotographer for the most part. So recently, at the end of January, I finally got a set of remote gear set up at Dark Sky, New Mexico, which I know some of the people on this call, including Dan, are members down there. So I've been able, since I can't get out anymore, I've been able to start collecting data again on a bunch of stuff. Steve kind of insinuated that I like to spend lots of time processing. That is not a lie. I like to spend lots of time gathering data, very deep images on specific areas because I think it's really neat with processing to pull the stuff out. Steve was talking about, 3 things that we do. One of them was pretty pictures, which I love to make. One of them was getting to see more than we can see with our eye, which I also love to do. What I'm going to show you is not so much scientific, because what I'm going to show you really destroys the data in a sense, from a linear sense, but there's a lot we can do in programs like PixInsight to maximize a lot of the hidden detail in the images. So the first image that I took down in New Mexico was M92, which, Steve, I'm glad you included a lot of M82, because here it is again. This is an unstretched integration stack from that data. And what we'll see here is, if we start to pull some of that up, you start to see, you know, more of the structure of M82, a lot of those nice inner dust lanes and things like that. But if we keep stretching this more and more and we kill some of the black point a bit, we start to get faint little hints of these jets coming off M82. Hopefully that's coming across. And if we really blow out the stretch on this, we can see that there's actually tons of these jets coming out. And in addition to that, if you've ever imaged M81 and M82, that area, there's a lot of integrated flux nebula sitting around there. It's really, really rich area. When you see pictures of M81 Bode's galaxy, you'll see a lot more of this. But actually around M82, we can see kind of up here that there are these nice little ribbons of stuff that just kind of run all over the image. And so the thing here is that the reason I picked this image to go over today is because this has an enormous dynamic range. So you have M82, which is pretty bright to begin with, but when we stretch to get all this really, really juicy stuff in the background, we kind of blow out M82 in the process. So, you know, there are some running jokes about how long I spend processing. I actually spend less time processing the image and more time processing masks, because it's the masks that really allow us to do stuff to the image that doesn't completely destroy it. You know, with a mask, you can bring out the detail. With a good mask, you can still retain a lot of sanity to the image. And so you maintain that realism. You know, I think there are also some jokes going around that you can really PixInsight an image to death. There are a lot of tools in PixInsight. It's very powerful. Masks are what you have to use to kind of tame it. So I'm going to go through some of that stuff today. So because I'm going to be doing masks, and hopefully it's not too boring, but certainly anybody interrupt me whenever I get to it. So anybody that's used PixInsight, there's actually a star mask process. That's what I just pulled up here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the settings. I'm just going to kind of give you some methods. The star mask, because of its name, I mean, that's the go-to thing to make a star mask. But if anybody has used this before, there are a lot of shortcomings to it. There's no preview, so you actually have to run it in order to see what the mask looks like. And it's not a trivial amount of time. So if, you know, you could spend 30 minutes trying to get a good star mask, and you may not even get it in that case. But to give you an idea of what these look like when you run it, well, at this crank away, you'll see how long it takes on a single image. And this is not a slouch computer either. Almost there. So you can imagine doing this 10 times gets a little annoying. But when you have a decent mask, you can see that, you know, this does a pretty good job on the stars. But if you recall seeing this really stretched image that we had, especially from dark skies like we have in New Mexico, where it's, you know, Bortle 1, Bortle 2, these really, this is not noise. Some of these things, I mean, these are very, very faint magnitude stars. And you can see that the star mask tool just does not pick those up. And when we want to go and run processes of sharpening like deconvolution, or we want to run noise reduction passes, there are a variety of tools for that. It is really critical to protect those little stars, or else you wipe them out or you cause these really strange artifacts. So I have found over the years that the star mask tool doesn't really do a great job for this. So there are a couple neat things we can do. The first one I'm going to show you, I call it, because I'm from the Midwest, I call it a Tryst wavelet transform, but this is French and I don't speak French, so it's really a true wavelet transform. I'll just call it AWT because it's easier. This is a tool that pretty much, it divides the image. The best way to describe it is it divides the image into wavelet planes. So each plane represents a different level of detail in the image. By default, there are 4. So I'm just going to play around with this. So you see with 4 layers here, we have 4 bars representing 1 for each layer. And then there's this R layer. This is called the residual layer. So what happens here is if I take out, let's just say I disable the first 4 layers and I leave the residual. Then, oh, I should mention the nice thing about this tool is it has a preview, so you don't need to run the tool every time. But you can see that each time, hopefully this comes through in Zoom, each time I remove one of these layers, the image gets just a little blurrier and a little blurrier. And that's because the first layer, the wavelet layer here, has the most detail, and each subsequent one kind of has more distorted layers. And so when you start removing these and you leave the residual on, you have a very noisy image. Now, if we were to reverse that process and remove the residual layer and start selectively adding these other layers back, you start to see some really magic stuff happen here.
Wow.
So hopefully that's coming across, but you can see that there are a bunch of little stars included now. So these wavelet passes, if you remove the residual, which is like the extra layers, everything that's left, you can imagine the image has layers 1 through infinity. We're just showing 4 of those layers now, and we've removed 5 through infinity. So this is a really powerful tool in getting those little stars to pop up. So to give you an example pass of what this looks like, I've tweaked these settings just a little bit. So there's a bias level on these. So you can basically strengthen what you can amplify each layer if you want. So here I have a really, really good mask that covers those teeny tiny stars. I'm gonna go ahead and run it here. The other nice thing is this is much faster than the star mask. But you can see down here, I mean, just these tiny little guys, you know, we have all these nice little areas of protection now. Now this by itself is not usually adequate for a good mask, but I'll show you a bit later that we can use things like very minimal blurring on the mask, and we can also combine this mask with other masks to really give us what I'll call a perfect mask. So we'll set that aside for a second, and I'll show you the next neat tool I found. So there's this guy, his name is Hartmut Bordemann. He's from Austria, I believe, and he has a bunch of PixInsight scripts that he publishes. I can post the link in the chat channel here when we're done. But one of them he has made is called Mask Gen. Oopsie. So Mask Gen gives you an image that looks roughly like this on the right. Now the way this works is it doesn't do any analysis of your image itself at all. What it actually does, and pull this tool up, is you can load, this uses catalogs, you know, survey catalogs, and generates your star mask based off of that. So there's no processing or analysis of your image done at all. It's taking public survey data and giving you the mask you want. So I can load a catalog with all the stars in it, and I can say, after it's done here, I can say, give me stars of magnitude 7 to 22, make the smallest stars of radius 2, make the biggest ones of radius 50. You execute it, and bam, there is a star mask. Absolutely no analysis needed whatsoever. Now, the cool thing about this is that you get really nice coverage and scaling between all the different magnitudes of stars. So it gives you something a little different than the AWT, the wavelet transform does. If I can pull that one back up. You can see these are a bit different, but you can target different types of stars on each one of these. And this is what I was talking about. You can combine these, and then you can have a really good mask at the end of the day.
So Rick?
Yeah.
On the star mask function itself, is that just a carryover from older versions, or is there a specific use for it?
Well, the use, yeah, it doesn't, it's not like it doesn't work.
I'm not saying it doesn't work, but you say there's a better way of generating a star mask.
I would say that there's a different way. Star mask is very good for what it is. I have on the screen again a mask that it generated. The nice thing about the star mask is that the stars are soft, which is really important for a good mask because you don't want any hard transitions on your masks, because then you'll see artifacts at those transition lines. And it kind of scales the brightness according to the magnitude, which is also representative of what's actually showing up in your image. So there's a lot of benefits to this. I don't mean to say that I don't use this. I absolutely use star mask, but I think what's overlooked in PixInsight a lot is that there are several other ways to get masks that attack different aspects of your image.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, no problem, of course. So the next little component piece I want to show you is clone stamping. And clone stamping is exactly what it sounds like, but it can actually be really helpful for us to target specific areas of your mask. So I created an image over here that's simply black. None more black if you're a Spinal Tap fan. And we can open the clone stamp, and we can use the black image as a source, and we can just, it's a clone stamp. You can do whatever you want. Now, the reason this is nice is because, you know, if I want a mask that only targets M92, which is very useful, as I'll show you here pretty soon, you need to spend time, get rid of all that stuff, just leave M82. And then I'll show you in a little bit how we can blur this out. You know, you just blur the daylights out of this thing, and it turns into a really good mask for just the galaxy. So that's a really nice tool if you need to target a specific spot on your image to open it up. Now let's get into the good stuff where we start combining things. So if you're familiar with deconvolution, one of the biggest aspects of deconvolution, one of the most important things is to have a really good, precise star mask. And by precise, I mean you want a mask that covers the bright part of the star, but not really that much more than that. And you want a mask that covers the really dim magnitude stars as well. What happens when you don't have a good mask is when you run deconvolution, you basically get stars that look like donuts. It puts these really dark black rings around all the stars. So the nice thing is the stronger or the better mask you have, the more powerful of a passive deconvolution you can use. You get those donut rings when you run deconvolution too strongly, basically. When you have a really good mask, a local star mask in place, you can really push it to the limit. And that's where you can maximize a lot of the detail in the image. And we'll see that in the core of M82 here in just a moment. So on the stack, the first thing I will do is I'm going to apply the AWT as I showed before, where we get, you know, really nice level of detail here. I have a clone stamp process that I ran before that I'm basically just going to remove the M82 portion because those aren't stars. The AWT included that, so you can just use a clone stamp to get rid of it. Adjust the curves a little bit to bring out more of those dim stars. So basically I just boosted everything up. And then a light pass of convolution, not deconvolution. So we're actually going to blur the image with convolution. I'll pop this process open. A really light pass, you know, I have 1.6 standard deviation. I think the default is 2, but this is really, really light. It's not going to do a whole lot, but all I'm trying to do here, I'll kind of undo this and show you again. So that's before it, and this is after it. So now we have a really nice representation of a star. So this is one component of a mask I'm going to use. The second piece I'm going to do is I use the mask gen script, which again uses the public catalogs for the stars. I'm again going to run a pass of clone stamp to get rid of the M82 bits in the middle there, because I want deconvolution to actually run on the core. I'm going to run another pass of convolution on it to kind of round things out just a little bit. I'll show you that's before and after, just to round out the edges of the stars. Now I've got two masks in place. I've got this one from AWT on the right that has a lot of the little stuff, and I have this nice one from the mask generation script that has a lot of the bigger ones. So the best way to do this is to use the pixel math tool. So you could spend an hour talking about the different functions in the pixel math tool, but what we're doing here is really simple. So $T just represents the target image. And what we're going to do is I'm going to add this image. The name of this image is Decon Mask 1 source, which is what this is. And I'm going to multiply the pixel values by 20. So basically, I'm applying this mask 20 times to this one. And what we get is a really, really good representation of a star mask. Now, when I ran this, you know, sometimes you got to tweak this. I think the edges are a little hard. I ran one more pass of deconvolution on it. So this, I mean, this is a killer decon mask. This is exactly what I have found, at least personally, what you want when you run decon. So with that mask in place, I ran it past the decon here previously. For those who are interested, these are the settings. I'll leave them on the left here. So I'm, long story short, I'm running 80 iterations on this. So hopefully you're going to get to sit through this actually running, sorry. So while this is going, the local star mask, the nice thing about this is that those areas on the stars, because we use the AWT, these little tiny guys are covered by that star mask. So what we're going to see is that we don't get those donut rings around them, and that those little tiny stars are actually kind of brought out a little bit, so that you kind of show those lesser magnitude stars, they're a little more prominent. So I don't know how good Zoom screen sharing is going to show this stuff, but really closely, this is before and after. So you see we're not doing a whole lot, but we are pulling in the stars a little bit. That's before and after. But what we're going to see here is that we haven't affected the stars a whole lot, but what decon is really trying to do here is do yummy stuff to this core. So you see this is before, that's after. So you get a lot of that nice dust material in the middle start to come out. If we bring this out even a little bit more to start to see some of these nice flames on the top, you can see that decon adds a little bit of detail there as well, pulls some of that blurriness back in. So that's when you have a really good mask, you can really maximize the use of that tool. Now, the next thing I mentioned that the masks are really good for is for noise passes. Now, when you're making a mask for a passive noise reduction on the background, the approach is completely different. So we don't just want to cover the stars, we want to cover all of the areas of signal, basically. So we can start with just a real basic AWT. So we can protect all those little stars. Remember now, in this case, when we're running a noise pass, if we don't cover those, those 24 mag stars or whatever that's back there, they're going to get completely wiped out by any noise reduction pass. So we'll put that one aside. And then for the other portion of the noise reduction mask, again, we want to protect the areas of signal. So I'm talking about M92, and I'm talking about all this nice IFN. I'm talking about these flames coming off M82. So if you run a curve and just, you boost those signal regions a lot and you bring back the background regions in a way that kind of keeps around that IFN. And again, this is a mask. You can be really abusive with this stuff. Then we'll add in the AWT mask we did to get all those little stars back in there. Run a passive convolution to kind of blur stuff out. Again, on a noise reduction mask, you want things to be very smooth, because if you have hard transitions, you're going to absolutely see that in the result after the noise pass, because one side of it's going to be totally blurred and the other side is going to be not blurred at all. And then for the type of noise pass that I do, which is called a multi-scale median transform, that is a topic in and of itself entirely. I won't go into the details on that, but you want a really, really strong mask. So here where it's white, we've completely protected M82. We've protected the stars. We've got some decent coverage on the integrated flex nebula clouds. And so when we run that, so this is before and this is after, you can see that all that noisy stuff in the background here, we've really smoothed that out. But at the same time, I'm going to zoom way in here. One of these stars, this is probably 24, 25 mag or so. It's not touched at all. And I'm going to overlay my mask on here, and you can see this brighter red area. That's that AWT component that we added in there. And because we use convolution, it got blurred out, and we don't see any weird transitions between this really dim star in the background. So on an area that, this is the top right of the image. I'm up in this preview area now, where we have some of that IFN. You know, the IFN is going to get hit a little bit, but that's okay because it is a bit noisy on itself. All we want to make sure we don't do is we don't want to blur it so much that you can't distinguish it from the background anymore. So again, with this mask in place, we run the noise reduction pass. And again, you can see that our background is really nicely leveled. The IFN got really nicely leveled, but we still have that distinction between the two of them. So when I zoom out here, this is before the noise pass. This is after. So now we have a really nice clean background on this image. And that's all due to this mask that not only covers the luminance components, but also those really small stars. Hopefully I've not put you guys to sleep yet. I know this is this is probably interesting stuff to look at if you've not seen it before. So the next type of mask I'm going to show you real quickly is where we use a clone stamp. So this is just a stretched image. We use clone stamp to kill everything except M82. We do a curves transform to really make sure that we cover M82 and bring back the background. We do a really heavy convolution pass just to blur the daylights out of this thing. Do another set of curves and convolution. And now we have this big white blob. And you will see when I apply it to this image. Now remember, this is a stretched image here. When I apply it to this image, and again, I stretched this image so that I could show the IFN, but the problem here is that M82 is just blown way out. So I have this mask that simply exposes M82 to the extent of these jets coming off at the top and the bottom of it. The reason I did this is because there's a tool called HDR multi-scale transform. Now HDR, you know, if you've done photography, this addresses really high dynamic range. And the pass I'm going to run on this with HDR multi-scale transform, what you're going to see is it completely reduces all of this bloat, and you start to see really what M82 is all of a sudden. Because we have this mask in place, we're not affecting any other part of the image. This HDR multi-scale transform tool is very, very finicky. If you run it in this median transform mode, this is the type of thing that can target that kind of bloat. So when I run it, you see that it completely wiped out all that haloing on M82. And now we're left with the good stuff. So again, before and afterwards. And at the same time, because we have that mask in place, none of this background, this really good stuff, these ribbons throughout the image, none of that's affected. And now we can see the jets coming all the way in towards the core. We still got the jets coming all the way out. And now we can start to see some of those. You can see real faintly in here, we're starting to get little vestiges of that dust in the middle coming through. So that's when clone stamp and a ton of blurring and a lot of curves transform can help you out. So similarly, I've made a mask here. I think I did anyway. I made a mask here similarly using the clone stamp, and you see that I stamped out a star on my own here, but blurred it out. And so now I'm focusing less on the jets on M82 and more just on the core, because I'm going to use a tool called local histogram equalization. This tool is a little bit different. It will be really good at equalizing the histogram of whatever is unmasked here, in this case this. So what we're going to see is that's going to help bring out some of the detail in these dust lanes. I can open up a preview to show you this one. So this is before application of the histogram transformation, and this is after. So you see before we kind of are a little washed out in the dust lanes. Afterwards, now we've really started to bring that out. We can see the continuity now of this flame coming through the center. And we get, if you've seen the Hubble image of M82, we're starting to get this really neat stuff that kind of splinters off to the sides like veins. And you're starting to see all the really good stuff on M82. Now, the other nice thing about the histogram equalization is that M82's got this really neat thing on this side where it's kind of got like these layers of the spiral. And just barely, this histogram equalization helps bring that stuff out. So there are a lot of benefits there. And again, because we've used this nicely tuned mask, we're not affecting anything else but the core of that image. So again, this is just using curves transformation, clone stamping, and a lot of blurring with convolution. Okay, now this is good. I'm going quicker than I thought. So this next set of things is going to address something that has plagued me for a very long time. And I actually didn't find a solution for this until about a week ago, but it fits right into this presentation. And that's when you have this bloat around really big stars, you get this like haloing effect. This isn't, you know, this isn't a filter reflection, but it's just that this star is so bright, you get these really faint, far, kind of like this bubbling around it, where it kind of just hazes out on these larger stars. And you even get it on some of these medium ones here. So if we are to start with our mask generation, again, this is the one that's using the public sources. We use clone stamp to get rid of everything except these stars that have haloing. So I've just manually selected these. You know, I looked at the image and I said, well, okay, so these 5 stars are the ones that I think have haloing. I would like to address that. So I've got that mask generation script. Next thing I do is I take an incredibly strong convolution pass on this, blur it really good. And so now I have these nice kind of faded, well, they almost look like marbles. So this mask specifically, I'm just trying to cover just a little bit around the halo of the star. This ends up being the part that I don't really want to touch. Now I'm going to come up with a second mask. Oops, that's not the right one. Where I use a curves transformation to blow that stuff up. I use clone stamp, I'm sorry, convolution and clone stamp, again, to highlight the same 5 stars. I run convolution to the nth degree to really blow this stuff out, and then I use curves to make these things really big. What I'm doing with this component is I'm trying to cover the extent of the halo on each one of these. And the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to subtract off this first mask I did, which is just covering the star portion, from this part, which is covering the halo portion, and I make delicious donuts on each one of these. And now by applying this mask to this image, you can see that I have only exposed the halo portion, but in the middle here where the red is, I've protected the star. Now what I'm going to do is I run the same HDR multi-scale transform that I used to reduce the bloat on M92. I'm going to do the exact same thing on this. And you'll see here, I'm just going to focus on the worst offender here. It brings that halo way back. So we go from this to this. And I'll show you the full image. We go from, that's before and after. So what we've done is we've reduced that halo quite a bit here. So that's a little less distracting. So this is only step 1 in reducing the halos. The next thing I do after that is I take that really diffuse mask before I made it donuts. I apply it to the image. So now all we're doing is we're exposing those 5 stars I'm targeting. And I use a curve where I'm just kind of pulling it back just a little bit. And what you'll see when this is applied is now those halos are 100% gone. And we're just left with the star. And as you can see, we've retained all of these nice, really dim stars that were kind of drowning in the halo, I'll call it. Now those are much more prominent and we're not distracted by that. Now the nice thing, and I don't have a color pass to show you here, but the nice thing about that is that really helps the color on those big stars, because typically your color images, when you integrate those, you start to get some like background modeling when you have those really big halos because there's not a lot of color presence there from your color filters. So by bringing this back, you can really zero in a really accurate color on those types of stars. So I just flew through an enormous amount of stuff. And either I put you to sleep or you don't, or you have questions or are scared to ask. So does anybody have anything they want to go through here? Silence is golden.
Rick,
Yeah.
Craig Ruppel here.
Hey.
Just, I've just started using PixInsight a couple of weeks ago, but could you basically go over again how you apply the mask to the image?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So let's take this last pass I did. So yes, if you've ever learned Photoshop, learning PixInsight is almost identical and completely different. There are really some weird nuanced things that you have to run through, and applying a mask is very non-intuitive. So in this case here, if I want to apply this mask on the right to this image on the left, you see on the left bar of the image, we have this tab, which kind of is identifying the image itself. If you drag the tab of the mask to the empty part of that bar, you get, I'm using my finger to point, you get this kind of square symbol next to your cursor. That means you are going to apply that mask. You just let go of it. And then if you make sure that that image is active, you have these 3 buttons up here. I've highlighted here, Invert Mask. This middle one is Enable and Disable the Mask, and the one on the right is Show It. So make sure you're showing it. And now we see that mask applied. So I can apply this one the same way. So I grab this tab, drag it over to the empty portion, and now that's my active mask. And if you want to invert it, you know, sometimes when you're making a mask, you kind of do it the opposite way that you intended. All you got to do is hit that invert button, and now we're protecting M92 and nothing else.
Which is the invert button?
That's this black one that's kind of got like a half circle in it.
Okay.
Yep, not very intuitive.
To show and invert your masks, you can also do Control-Shift-I to invert back and forth, and you can do Control-K to show if you don't want to look for those little buttons up top.
Yeah, keyboard shortcuts are nice, thanks.
And you can also use the drop-down menus up at the top where it says mask.
Yep, right there. Can remove the mask the same way. And actually, so these 2 buttons to the left here, this one with the X on it removes the mask altogether. So if I hit that, it's gone.
Hey, Rick, it's Bill Newbert. This is fantastic stuff as usual. I'm really grateful that you walk us through this. It saves me months of trying to learn it. I got a kind of an unrelated question. What telescope are you using to capture this image?
I got a 12-inch Newt from TS Optics in Germany. The focal length, if I recall correctly, is 1391 millimeters. So it's turned out really nice. That scope has a conical mirror on it on the backside, so it actually mounts from the back center of the mirror. So there are no mirror clips on it, which is really nice because now you know there's no diffraction pattern associated with those on any portion of the image. And those mirrors are also a bit lighter, which is nice in New Mexico because the temperature fluctuates so much. You know, you stay closer to temp much more accurately. So it's been a great scope. You know, Newts are a bit of a bear to set up perfectly because collimation and fun things like that, and you have things moving. And actually, I need to make a trip down there to tweak a couple things, but I've been really happy with it so far. I mean, again, this is my first light image. I would have to say I'm pleased with how it's turning out so far. I haven't actually combined the color to it yet. I'm still kind of tweaking stuff on it, but it's been working really well so far.
And go ahead and tell them what kind of you're using, what kind of camera you're using.
Oh yeah, so I'm using the same. I think the same one as Dan. It's an SBIG STF 8300M. So that's a CCD. Been around. I don't know. That thing's probably been around 10 years now. I bet, right, or more.
Yeah.
So it's the same one I used in St. Louis actually when I was using my 8-inch Newt. So I just put it down there, figuring that it's impossible to image from home anymore. For the mount, I actually got the mount out of the Netherlands. It's a Mesu or Mesu 200. So this guy Lucas Misu makes these. It is a friction drive mount, so there are no worm gears or anything like that. Really, really interesting mount design. I'll need to share some pictures of it on our channel at some point. From a mechanical standpoint, it is really cool looking. It has worked really well. The payload is obscene on it. It's more than I'm ever going to use. It's like 100 kilograms or something like that. But it's been working great down there so far. I think that's all the gear I've got on there.
Rick, this is Joe.
Hey, Joe.
Hi. I wanted to ask, this is a luminance image you're working with?
Correct, yes.
So do you ever do this level of masking and detail work on the actual combined LRGB, or mostly just at luminance and apply color later?
So certainly I spend way more time masking the luminance because that's where all the detail comes from. When I run through, typically my workflow is I'll take the luminance as far as I can take it detail-wise, kind of like what you see on the screen here. RGB I will process separately because, you know, you can blur the heck out of that and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So you can do a lot of, like, you know, chrominance noise reduction and things like that. So I will use some simple star masks and sometimes some galaxy masks like I showed here. The same types of things can be used on that image. If, for example, you only want to boost saturation on, you know, the stars that are 10 magnitude or dimmer, things like that. So yeah, I'll use some of the same processes here on the color image. Once I combine them, usually I'm only limiting myself to contrast, curve transformations, and maybe some saturation tweaks. I don't do, after I combine them, you know, I don't want to destroy all the detail I spent days on on the luminance image. So once I throw them together, I don't do any more NR passes or anything like that.
Okay.
Now, a whole nother topic to discussion, you know, M92 has a really nice hydrogen alpha component on those jets. Maybe some other time I can talk about how different ways to combine this into the image, but I will typically not do a whole lot of processing on this, except if I'm really interested in how cool I can make the jets look, you know, just for my own satisfaction. But I think that the hydrogen alpha part of M82 is just fascinating to me, especially, you know, when you get the dark skies and some lawn integration. There's this little swoop up here you get too that I had actually not seen before up in this top area. And actually it comes through just a bit on the luminance here, but there's some really cool stuff going on there. So I've taken an image of this area before. You know, I did a combined M81, M82, which is what a lot of people do. I actually find a combined M81, M82 image to be one of the hardest to process because what you have to do to each galaxy to bring out the detail is like extraordinarily different. So this was actually a bit of a relief just to do an image with M82. Glad I'm at that focal length. But with those dark skies, I had not seen there. I don't know if this is coming through on the screen share or not, but there are these really, really dim fingers in the clouds here that I had not seen before. That I'm sure is attributed to the dark skies down there. So I've been really pleased with what's been coming out of this. And I've got some, I got some other images, you know, I'll certainly share with the group when I'm all done, but I took, another one I completed recently was M92, the Globular Cluster. And as it turns out, there's some really neat galactic cloudy stuff in there too, if you really go deep on it. So I'll be sure to show that stuff, and I'd be happy, you know, if people are interested, to show some of the processes on those too at some later meeting.
Excellent.
Rick, this is Mike Krasinski. Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Hey, Mike.
Hey. So you were showing the mask that you made with the script that used the catalog stars.
Yes.
And I haven't used scripts really too much with the PixInsight. Are these things that is this something that comes with PixInsight, or do you have to download the scripts that other people write, or?
You can do both. So PixInsight comes with a really large number of scripts built in already. You know, there are all these batch pre-processing ones, so you can like batch calibrate images. You can do subframe selection based on eccentricity and FWHM, so you can throw out bad images. Basically, it comes with a ton of stuff. You know, there's an image solver, which is really popular to use to get the astronomical coordinates associated with the image. But the mask generation one I showed you is actually the first that I've installed from a third-party user. He actually has a pretty big batch. I think it comes in a group of about 15 different scripts, and I think they all fall under this utility. So this mask gen specifically is from him. It does not come with the default installation. So hopefully that answers your question. But there's some,
thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, so there are some really useful scripts in here. One that comes with PixInsight that I've used on M92 is a dark structure enhance script. Here, I'll pull up my image and I'll just destroy it since we're having fun here. So this dark structure enhance is really good at splitting out really faint differences like between the IFN here and the true background. I'm going to be really abusive with it here to kind of highlight the point. This one runs fairly quickly. All right, so this is the after. So let's go right here. So that's the before, and that's the after. So you can see like these lanes in here, and even in between where some of these jets are at, it buries that stuff. And so there's a blending slider in there. So I mean, like I said, this was really abusive just to kind of accentuate the point. But you know, over here on each side of the IFN ribbon here, you can see where that background kind of just falls way back there. So yeah, there are some really neat scripts in there. Dark structure enhance is one of them that I use quite a bit. So it's worth going through a couple of those. Cool.
So question, this has all been recorded, right? So
yes,
I try to follow this as good as I could. But I think if I'm going to put this in practice, I'm going to need to replay this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. I think Dan's recording it, and I know I ripped through this stuff really quickly. You can see why I spend hours and hours and hours processing an image, because there's a ton of stuff you can do, and like applying processing techniques to your masks rather than your image, I find just as important or more important than the rest of the stuff. But yeah, it's recorded. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've used Star Mask quite a bit, and I've never really been totally satisfied with it.
Yeah, it's a frustrating tool, right?
Yeah, it is.
I think I speak for the rest of us when I say we memorized every step, so no need to.
I knew I could count on you, Bill. Yeah, Star Mask is pretty frustrating. It's good for what it is, but it's nice to have those other options, you know, in the back pocket. They can really come in handy. Cool.
Pretty happy with my masks until I saw this.
Well, I hope it helps out, you know, and I really should qualify this entire presentation by saying I do not consider myself an expert. You know, I'll look up information, but a lot of the time I spend is just kind of trying stuff out, because there's a lot of, you know, if you look at all the processes in PixInsight, this is the list of them. I usually only use about 10 of these. And so curiosity always gets the better of me, and it's like, well, what does this one do? And what does this one do? And then you go off on, you know, it's like the Wikipedia tangent. You end up, you know, 10 articles later, you're reading about, you know, I don't know, World War I when you were originally looking up what COVID's about. But there are so many processes in here, and that's actually how I stumbled upon this AWT process. And yeah, when you remove this AWT is amazing for masks. I think it would really be a neat thing if anybody's not used it for a mask before, play around with it, because it could solve a lot of the problems you have run into with the typical star mask.
Well, one thing I found with PixInsight is there's not too many people who consider themselves to be experts on this stuff, but you find that there's different levels of expertise. And it's almost like, you know, trying to read the entire internet. I mean, it's there's just so much there.
Yeah, there is. When they come out with a new process or a tweak to a new one, anybody that uses PixInsight's been on the forums and knows who Juan is.
Oh yeah.
I'll when they come out with a new process, I'll read it, and I'll just tell myself that is I'm never starving for more information. I'll put it that way. It's always usually I don't know what I read by the time I'm done reading it, but you know, he does at least a good job of explaining stuff and doesn't leave anything to doubt. Is probably the best way to put it. But
so one recent one they added was that weighted batch pre-processing, and I've used that quite a bit. And I've worked with Roberto on a few bugs with it when it was first coming out.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, that's been a big time saver because you can basically set up all that stuff, and it'll do all of the calibration and integration and alignment and registration and stacking. And you just, basically walk away and, get yourself a drink or do some other errands and come back and it's ready for you.
Yeah, that's one I have not checked out. I think, didn't they just add that within the last year?
Yes,
So?
yes,
Yeah.
brand new, yeah.
So because I was out of commission for so long, I haven't actually played around with that yet, but I need to, because my process of calibrating and rejecting bad images has a lot of hand holding in it right now. So it would be nice to drink a pot of coffee instead of like having to service this every now and then. Yeah, that would be good. I should, so since this is recorded before we stop recording, I want to qualify something on record here. When you use this HDR multi-scale transform tool, just because these are the settings I used does not mean they will work for you. There is no good way, in my opinion or in my experience, there's no good way to figure out what settings are right. I've almost thrown random number generators at this thing before, because that's usually what it is. Like, I'll pick a set of numbers, run it and say, yeah, that doesn't look good. And then you just kind of click a couple things, try it again, say, that looks better. So I just wanted to qualify that these exact settings may not work for you, but never fear, because there are a lot of different scaling functions, different number of layers that you can try out. Typically you will find what you want. The one word of caution I will give is do not ever run this on a preview and think you will get the same result when you apply it to the whole image. If I run, because usually when you run on a preview, it'll run faster, which is one of the benefits of doing it. But if I run this on this preview, and then I run this exact same thing on the whole image, I will get a different result. Right. So beware with this tool. Disclaimer over.
Hey, Rick, what did you say about that median transform checkbox in the HDR transform process?
So what I have personally found is that if I'm trying to reduce bloat, let me get that example up. Where did I put that? Is this it? No. I'm going to find it here. I think this is it. Yes, if I'm reducing bloat, like I'm showing here, I find this median transform to work really well. If I'm trying to, what I'm going to call flatten the HDR portion to bring out the detail, I will not use that, and I will use one of these scaling functions instead.
Okay, so what you're saying is if you have the median transform, so now those scaling functions aren't being used.
Yeah, it's an either or thing. Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Can I confuse anyone else on anything?
Not confusing at all.
Oh, okay, good. Good to hear. Well, anyway, it was nice I appreciate Dan prompting me to join and give this presentation. I think it's probably been 18 months since I've been an attendee at one of these meetings. So it was nice to join. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen.
It's been 6 years for me.
I enjoyed it.
You could entice you to come back and show us how you integrate the color into this or something like that.
Yeah, sure. I should.
Actually, I would love to see the part 2 of this image right here.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think we can probably schedule something with that. I'll talk with Dan about it when he's looking for topics.
This was incredible.
Good deal. Yeah, I got to say, I'm really happy with the data I'm getting from down there. It's been really fun so far. So I finished this image, I think back in February, the end of February. And it's one of the reasons it's taken me this long to actually get around to processing it is because we've had a lot of clear nights, especially as of late. And I spend all my time doing like test integrations of the new stuff I'm getting that I never get around to finishing the old stuff. So that's another good reason that presenting kind of gives me a deadline. It's nice. So Dan, if you want this M82 done by next month, schedule me.
I figured as much.
So you're saying your skies are clear too often. Boy, we just all feel terrible for you, Rick. It's just terrible.
It's really just been last month and this month have been really good. February and March, as I recall, were not great. Kind of struggled through it. But yeah, the forecasts this month are looking good. Last month was great. It's been really cool. And all the butterflies with running remote gear are gone now. I think I just hit the button and go to bed now. It's nice. All the kinks are worked out.
Hey, completely different question. You intentionally trying to rock the Guy Fawkes look?
This is my Walking Dead beard. It'll be gone. Whenever I start going back to work, it'll go away. I've never grown a beard before, actually. It seemed like a good time to do it.
Yeah. Damn, that's something else.
So Rick, what are you using for automation software down in New Mexico?
I'm using SGP, Sequence Generator. And I forget who made the comment that they're becoming increasingly frustrated with it, but I resonate with that. Yeah, Sequence Generator is funny. It's almost like it's so complicated that you expect it to have every option in there, and then when you go to look for the one that you need, it's not there.
Right.
And then you turn on the alternative, and it doesn't work. But
I love it when I click a button like, the autofocus functions and nothing happens. It's like, why?
Yep. Yeah, there's some frustration with it.
Rick, I was going to close out